This review was made possible by the support of my patrons. Patrons get early access to these reviews and also get their names in the credits, as well as access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server. More details in the description. And now we're here, the final chapter of this 6-week-long experiment in modern Doctor Who serialization for Doctor Who Flux: The Vanquishers, a production delayed and allegedly truncated due to pandemic restrictions, dozens of dangling plot threads and characters, mysteries being teased which might date back to the beginning of the franchise itself, and a universe-ending cataclysm closing in. So, does The Vanquishers get across all of these elements? Chocolate! Okay, so this was always going to be a difficult episode to break down, especially now, looking back, it seems that the previous chapter, Survivors of the Flux, was nothing more than a filler episode. It seems kind of strange that you'd make a 50-minute penultimate chapter not amount to anything when there's so much going on, but whatever, we'll get to that later. Let's just try and break down the premise here. So, following on from the last episode, the Doctor uses her quick thinking and resources to escape from the advancing Swarm in Azure. As a result of the Doctor removing her conversion plate and being touched by Swarm at the same time, whilst being outside of the universe, this somehow manages to fracture the Doctor's existence into all of the subplots, with one Doctor being held by Swarm and Azure threatening her with a life of torture as they're now in charge of the final Flux, another Doctor infiltrating the Sontaran invasion Earth 2021 AD with Bel and Carvanista. We also have a third Doctor who is reunited with Dan, Yaz and Jericho in Williamson's tunnels, and since the TARDIS is there, somehow, she can start making moves to prevent the final Flux event, rescue Vinda and Diane trapped in Passenger, and defeat the Sontarans who plan to wipe out the Daleks and the Cybermen in one fell swoop to become the dominant foes in the cosmos. So lots to cover in just 1 hour's worth of TV. But it didn't have to be this way. With Survivors of the Flux, so many plot threads started there and never get resolved. The Grand Serpent assassin in 1904? Never explained. The painted sign in China to Carvanista? It never plays a factor. Finding the date for the apocalypse? It's a dead end. Apart from giving us a reveal that the Grand Serpent and the Sontarans are working together, that whole unit backstory? Completely irrelevant. Kate Stewart going dark and undercover in 2017? 1. Tecteun is never seen or heard from again. The Division as an organisation never plays a role other than the origin of the Flux itself, but because Swarm and Azure take over the final event, then it just muddies the water. We also have Vinda, who had a plan to get absorbed by Passenger to try and rescue Bel, and use a communicator to get the Doctor to rescue them, but once he's inside, he discovers that Bel isn't there, and also he can't use his communicator, despite having training on how to escape Passenger forms, so he should know he can't use the communicator. It also seems a bit strange to commit yourself to an endless prison inside of Passenger without confirming first that Bel is in there, but he sure got lucky that Diane was in there, who apparently has learnt how to damage and potentially break out of Passenger. She said that she was kept inside because the Ravagers underestimated her and thought she was insignificant. But if she is so insignificant, why kidnap her in the first place? To taunt Dan Lewis? Okay, maybe, but once that's done, why was she not part of the other life forms fueling the Time Force last time? It's not just logistical or character-related issues in this subplot either, it's also structural. Why not have the TARDIS arrive in that black void to rescue Vinda and Diane, instead of having Passenger suck them back inside, so the TARDIS has to then just go in there instead to rescue them? It's all just padding, and these brief digressions in a plot that is this stuffed do add up over time. Kind of like how in this scene, where the Grand Serpent is interrogating some guy. Seriously, it's never established who this person is. What the hell? How can a story be this sloppily told? Interrogation scenes like this don't even work for an audience if they don't have any context. I guess it's meant to hit home the point that the Grand Serpent and Kate Stewart are sworn enemies and that she's his main antagonist. Heck, in this scene, the Grand Serpent is ignoring Sontaran command to try and get Kate's location. His own personal vendetta is what's driving him now, not the grand plan. The reason the Grand Serpent is interrogating the Doctor is to discover Kate Stewart's location.
Where is Kate Stewart?
Your own torture chamber.
But Kate Stewart and the Grand Serpent, prior to this, have only had one encounter together, and that was the Grand Serpent just ignoring her threats before planting a bomb in her house. This is not a rivalry worth building up an hour of TV for, especially because, practically, the Grand Serpent has absolutely no place within this story. The Sontarans don't need him in any way, shape or form, so cut the fat. And if you did need to do something with him, if you did need to give him a rival, then why not give him an opponent who the audience have already seen a proper on-screen dynamic with? Maybe someone who was, I don't know, a whistleblower to his fallen empire. Someone who he might have been looking for, but couldn't find due to, I don't know, just off the top of my head, some sort of witness protection style arrangement. It's Vinder. The punchline is Vinder. Ignoring Vinder's dynamic with the Grand Serpent until this ending scene feels really negligent and shows that the priorities of the Vanquishers just are not lining up with the arcs and the characters established over the past 5 chapters. Kind of like how the Sontarans kill the Lupari off screen, but it's not Karvanista who gets the heroically framed speech and the proclamation against them, it's Jericho. Of all people. Yeah, Karvanista got to say something on the transmitter screen whilst the Sontarans were being destroyed at the end, but just listen to the heroic swelling music, the framing of the camera, the declaration of who they are. It's night and day. Jericho got an epic speech. Karvanista got to yell at a screen, despite Karvanista being way more deserving of the former. But yeah, let's talk about Karvanista here. The Sontarans managed to kill 7 billion Lupari in an afternoon, and it's so rushed and comes so out of left field that I genuinely thought the Sontaran commander was bluffing when it happened. This does not remotely land. There's no evidence of this achievement, the ships are still in the atmosphere, and Karvanista and the Doctor can take control of them at the end, so what's the point? In fact, Karvanista is the only Lupari that we've even seen in this series. It's really a testament to Craig L's performance under that makeup and the quiet fury behind those eyes once the penny drops, that this moment, this reveal, is given any sort of credibility. And then the scene ends with,
I'm gonna kill every last Sontaran! I look forward to the combat.
I thought we'd get a Karvanista and Commander Stenk showdown at the end, but nope, Karvanista just mopes around in the TARDIS and yells at a screen for the rest of the episode. Oh, after being rescued by Dan Lewis, who, I'm assuming, at this point, has no idea what's happened to the Lupari.
In the doggos, are you?
Go away.
Now then.
Be nice or you won't get a biscuit.
But then the next scene opens with Dan being the one to explain what happened to the Lupari.
Is he okay?
So this cut implies, unintentionally or otherwise, that Dan knew that before making those insults, as it's not someone else explaining the Lupari's fate to him, but the other way around. Here, you'd maybe expect a moment where Karvanista shoves past him, Dan's like, hey, what's your problem, mate? And Karvanista explains, to which Dan could then offer some condolences, and he can maybe have a human moment with a creature that literally bonded with him as a species and saved him from the flux in the first episode. But no, instead we get...
Fetch your dog? And I have. Wow. That the poor fellow was good after all.
Like, what kind of story priorities are these? God forbid we get an inkling of emotion or connection between these characters. The story almost gets there at one point, where the Doctor and Karvanista are locked up, and the Doctor lets him know that she's aware that they worked together, and they were at the Temple of Atropos, and Karvanista can't bear to say anything to the Doctor, after she just left him. It's a really nice moment. But it turns out that Karvanista literally cannot say anything because there's a device in his brain.
I have a synaptic collider implanted in my brain. If I talk about it, the collider will inject poison directly into my brain. I'll be dead in 3 seconds.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
This might be here to remind audiences of the evil of division, But Division ended last episode with Tech Tae-yun's death. You don't need this here. And let's not forget, if Karvanista was so loyal and respected the Doctor so much but now feels betrayed and tried to get away from her, why did he try to kill her in the way that he did in the very opening set piece of Doctor Who Flux? The beginning and the end of this story is just not matching. Kind of like how, for several episodes, Swarm and Azure have been talking about a war between time and space, and speaking about time as some abstract concept or a force that they're fighting for. But then it turns out no, time is a person, and was the actual big driving force this whole time. Not only does it serve to massively undercut Swarm and Azure, but it also means the audience had no comprehension on what they were even trying to do for the past 3 episodes. Also, speaking of threads from earlier on, it's so strange how the Flux was the inciting incident of this series, only for it to get interrupted by the Doctor. But then, in chapter 5 of 6, the idea of a final Flux event gets mentioned by Tech Tae-yun outside of the universe, and now the entire cast, whether or not they're even aware of this conversation, just roll with it and act like a final Flux was always part of the plan. Which then goes on to beg the further question, hey, universe, are you doing okay? Because this episode ends on a relatively upbeat note and the Earth seems to be back to normal and everyone goes their separate ways, but did the Flux still happen? Has everything been fixed? Are there repairs to be done? Like, what's the basic status quo here? Personally, I'm happy to end this series on almost any status quo, but I think it's important to let the audience know what that status quo is. Like, what has the Flux done by the end? It's not like it's an unimportant element or anything. Not only is it the inciting incident, it's the literal subheader of the 6-episode run. It's kind of a big deal. With the planet Time and unleashing it and then rewinding time to watch the Flux destroy the universe all over again. So was the Flux stopped during a rewind? Swarm and Azure arrive on the planet Time at the end, expecting time to have been freed, but they're surprised, so maybe? Either way, it feels like something you really need to put a pin in and let the audience know for sure. I can accept some unanswered questions, like the Doctor's past, which is clearly going to run over into the 2022 specials, but I think some of the more fundamental, self-contained elements need to be addressed, like what was Azure doing in the Arctic at the beginning, and what was that signal all about? Why did Tech Tae-yun release Swarm in the first place? If you can't even answer those questions, then I honestly can't blame audiences for not having any faith in your ability to answer other questions, and considering how you built up Division for a whole season only to answer who they were with,
Division is simple and indescribable.
Then it's not a really good track record, is it? Speaking of track records, early on the Doctor hijacks Karvanista's ship and plans to crash into the Sontaran command post, but there's a force field, and it's revealed that this was the Doctor's plan all along.
You knew they'd do that.
People rarely want to be crashed into. They tend to take precautions.
Now, that makes sense, but only if you forget that crashing into Sontaran ships was literally the way they were defeated only 4 episodes ago, in a script that was penned by the exact same writer. This is one pretty massive gamble on the Doctor's part, and not informed by any of the actions in the show.
You just upped everything past maximum!
She's insane.
This episode really feels like Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Just everywhere you go, there's just questions that are raised, basic logistical points not being addressed, and character development going out the window for the sake of the story moving forward, as well as character inconsistencies.
I've lived more in my time with you than I did during the previous 2 decades.
But Jericho has only spent a couple of hours with the Doctor. He's spent over 3 years with Yaz and Dan, so why don't they get a look in? Do I think that the scene where the lone Sontaran is stealing all of the chocolate incredibly funny? Yes, in fact, I think it's bloody brilliant. I love it. I love everything about it. But would I rather that that scene was replaced with Kate Stewart, or maybe some members of her resistance playing a role? Absolutely. It's a shame that Kate Stewart is here, but has absolutely nothing to do, especially how I think about The Power of Three, a Chris Chibnall penned episode which gave her my favourite characterisation so far. But yeah, I think it's simultaneously a work of genius, but also an admission of defeat on the part of Chris Chibnall to just split the Doctor off into each subplot for the finale, because there's just so much left to wrap up. But maybe if you actually did something with the last episode, you wouldn't be spread so thin, but what do I know? Anyway, this does result in some great scenes and moments. I really liked the scene between the Doctor and the Grand Serpent. This scene is probably the only reason the character was brought back after Once Upon Time. Just seeing the Doctor with razor accuracy just tear his character down and poke fun at his obvious villain traits. It's really, really great. I thought the interactions between the multiple Doctors was really good as well. I always get a bit giddy whenever versions of the Doctor make contact, and this was no exception. We also get this scene where Azure tries to figure out what motivates the Doctor, and I really liked this scene, how we've got Azure, one half of a force of nature that just seeks to destroy out of instinct and to rebel against the natural order, going up against someone whose name, whose promise, is to sustain and look after life. It's a promise versus blind faith. I'm so glad it was Azure who got this scene as well, because while Sam Spruell has been terrific as Swarm throughout this whole series, I feel like Rashenda Sandel has been really underrated in Flux. She's been just as good. But yeah, the Ravagers see destruction as not just an act, but as a faith. It's a really cool exploration, like how they feel so entitled to what they do. I just wish that they didn't spend most of this episode at a computer console, only to get embarrassingly dusted at the end by an entity we didn't even know existed until this episode. It turns out the real villains of this series have been the Sontarans, which is one hell of a flex, I guess. So their plan is to use the final Flux as a way to convince their Dalek and Cybermen foes to form an alliance with them for protection behind the Lupari shield, but they'll betray them at the last second and use the Flux to wipe them out. So the Sontarans broadcast a message, and I love the dig at the Rootans, that bit's great.
We must join together to survive this threat against us. It must be obliterated.
But they broadcast this message without knowing when or where the final Flux will form, which seems a bit presumptuous. It turns out they're using humans to fuel their psychic command center, and while we never see this happen before Jericho and Claire show up, I can kind of understand, pandemic filming restrictions, I get it, but the order of this plan seems really strange. Why put out the video message before they've even got a time and a place? Either way, the Doctor uses her TARDIS to rescue Claire from the 1960s because they need her psychic powers, and...
Hello, Miss Brown. Oh, I say.
Did you catch that? No? Okay, look at the framing of this shot.
Oh, I say.
Okay, I could talk about this shot for ages, so I will. Near the end of Village of the Angels, we had this side-on profile shot demonstrating the split between those from 1901 and 1967, this boundary in the screen that cannot be crossed. So when Jericho says hello to Claire, and the camera cuts, they're now on the opposite sides of the frame in that same profile shot. Heck, there's even a road dividing them, like a literal line. This is the same shot in Village of the Angels that told the audience, no, they can't come together. But here, Claire runs over the road, this imaginary subconscious line, the camera zooms in, and gives Jericho a big hug. This shot is wonderful. In fact, I got so distracted by this shot and this reunion that I'm changing topics. We'll talk about Claire and Jericho's subplot and the Sontarans' power play later. Now, the tone of this review has been pretty negative so far, but when this scene happened, when this shot happened, I got butterflies in my media-loving stomach because part of me instinctively knew that this serialized format was actually working, as characters from before were being reunited and finding a place in this finale. Now, when I do these reviews, I tend to overthink the story and the mechanics, but if there's a gut feeling that I can't quite put my finger on, that's the instinct I want to follow, because even if my head is saying that something is not working, if I can have a reaction like that, maybe there's something here worth digging deeper on. I mentioned in my review of Once Upon Time that this felt like a pandemic production, not because of any limitations in filming, but in the subtext of characters like Belle and Vinda trying to find each other at the end of their world, the Doctor trying to find identity as the universe breaks around her, Yaz and Dan searching for home and their friends after being zapped away by a metaphor for fascism which caused the world to literally regress around them. So with that in mind, when Vinda and Belle, and Dan and Diane reunited in the TARDIS and hugged each other, I got choked up a bit, I'm not gonna lie. It felt like an actual emotional culmination. While Belle tells Vinda that he's going to be a dad, Diane was hurt by Dan for being late for their date, and now appears to be feeling cold about the relationship. Now, maybe, and this is just maybe me speaking out of turn here, maybe they should have explored that thought process, rather than focusing on a Sontaran's chocolate addiction.
Chocolate!
But while I'm here, once again, it's kind of strange to have another comedic interaction with Karvanista and Dan, despite the Lupari, being dead, but whatever. It's also a bit hard to know Diane's framework here, and I credit Josh Carr from the Who Knew podcast for this observation. The timescale between all the characters is not the same. Since the beginning, we've more or less followed the Doctor in real time. Yaz, Dan and Jericho have been on a years-long journey between episodes. We know that Belle and Vinda have been on their own journeys. But how long was Diane in Passenger? How does time work there? Dan waited for 3 years to try and rescue Diane, but for all we know, Diane might have only been inside of Passenger for a couple of days. Once again, without elaboration or clarification, it's a bit hard to get on board and see Diane's perspective. On paper, I can appreciate what this is going for. If the pandemic is the subtext of this saga, then we could maybe take it further and see Diane as someone who has been changed by these events and has different priorities now. I have known couples who lived separately before the pandemic, who were inseparable, but couldn't see each other for a year, and then when they met up again, things had changed, and they're not together anymore. I'd appreciate it if the story could actually back anything up in the text itself, but we work with what we're given. But apparently a 2-minute scene with the Sontarans and chocolate, or a 15-minute subplot in the last episode giving us a peek behind the curtain at UNIT was way more important than actually giving a character a proper emotional framework. Anyway, I did like how Belle and Vinda's baby, Tigme, was just a baby. Nice. These are just ordinary people fighting for survival at the end of the universe, not the Doctor's secret parents or something. It's great to see. And what I will say in favour of the Vanquishers is that I've seen many people say that this episode is Chris Chibnall's Journey's End, and I can see the resemblance. We've got multiple Doctors wiping out races at the end, we've got a cast and a family from several prior episodes assembling, etc. Moments and character culminations, which we really don't get here. What I will say is that at least The Vanquishers does give something for its supporting cast, except Kate Stewart, to do. Journey's End assembled Jack, Gwen, Yanto, Sarah Jane, Luke, Martha and Rose, and didn't give them anything to do. In fact, almost half of that list spent that entire two-parter just waiting around on a soundstage. At least The Vanquishers made it feel like the assembled cast was contributing to something, rather than just sticking them in a cupboard for an hour. Joseph Williamson gets to explain how he happened upon the end of the universe, why he built the tunnels, and even gets a nice goodbye scene as the story puts that subplot to bed. Steve Oram really has been a highlight of Doctor Who Flux. But when you think about it, his tunnels plot device didn't really need to exist. Yeah, it's here to get people from one place to another, to get Yaz and Dan back to 2021, but when they arrive in 2021, the Doctor, split across dimensions, finds them there, and Kate has brought her TARDIS. Once the TARDIS is here, you don't need the tunnels anymore. Claire is picked up from the 1960s in the TARDIS, and considering that the whole series has never really needed a reason to just transport characters from one side of time and space to the other, maybe the tunnels' place in the story needed a complete retool. As cool as it was to see an underrepresented historical together in the moment when we had characters splitting up into teams to take down the Sontarans and turn the Flux against them. Even Jericho and Claire did play a role, though a bit superficial and contrived. Claire gets zapped away by a transmat ring, but Jericho drops his.
Go, Miss Brown!
Now, I can imagine some viewers throwing their hands up in the air at that moment, but morally, I can't do that, because I'm a clumsy git myself. But yeah, when Jericho died, I was kind of shocked. I loved that guy, and the Chibnall era seemed to have made its main cast invincible. But no, Jericho gets destroyed by the Flux. We even have the Daleks and the Cybermen, the Flux following them, arriving behind the Lupari shield and accepting the peace agreement just in the nick of time.
I'm sorry we're late. Me and Steve went to the movies before arriving.
Yes, we made sure to pick a short film, but forgot to account for the 30 minutes of adverts beforehand.
We went to see Venom 2. I wanted to see No Time to Die, but it's nearly 3 hours long.
Jeff is right. We've heard it's good, but that length requires a full afternoon commitment.
Being late would have saved us. I guess we could have seen No Time to Die after all.
It's always about the hindsight with you, isn't it, Jeff?
But, once again, cause and effect storytelling just goes out of the window. The last time the Doctor spoke to the Ood division is about minimising the impact of the final Flux.
If I could get those Ravagers away, would you be able to minimise the final Flux event?
My impact may be minimal, but I'll try. Doctor.
But the Flux is going to wipe out everything anyway, so what did the Ood even do? Even the Sontarans' original plan of slowing down the Flux with the army fleets doesn't make sense. I've no idea why they thought that would work in the first place, when the Flux has been eating whole galaxies and has not slowed down. But whatever, I'm kind of past caring at this point. Also, I know that this scene is structured like this, so there's actually a reaction to the exposition to make things more exciting and tense, but think of the implications of this explanation of the Doctor's solution to nullify the Flux about to destroy Earth.
Some of the Flux is going to make it through the Lupari shield. It's not enough. We've thought about that. There's a way to deal with the remnants of it. Right, what were you telling me?
The passenger form. Inside is endless matter. Can't you use that to absorb what's left of the Flux?
Diane, you may just have saved the rest of the universe.
The Doctor says, right, what were you telling me? As if Diane had an idea earlier, but the Doctor thought, nah, tell me at the last possible moment. They really never heard that plan or explanation before now, and they just let the Flux head towards them without the passenger plot resolution? Why can't they just already have the plan in place and Diane can explain it to the audience as it happens? Because, to be fair, the passenger containing and absorbing the final Flux is a pretty clever payoff and rounds things out quite nicely. I'm also just really personally happy that this absolute Chad was able to stop a universal extinction level event just because of how beefy he is. My boy. So yeah, because the Doctor and friends were able to stop the Flux from making it to Atropos, time is not unleashed, and as punishment, time dissolves Swarm and Azure. Time then takes the form of the 13th Doctor to talk to her, and I really wish she'd taken the form of the Fugitive Doctor instead. Time teases that they won't kill the Doctor, because her time is coming to an end really soon anyway, and the Master will probably be there. The Doctor brings Dan on board, and opens up to Yaz, in probably the best scene of the episode, where the Doctor apologises for not letting Yaz in, and letting her know exactly what's been going on. But before they can actually develop this...
I want to tell you everything.
I'd like that.
Did you say left or right?
Come on, Scouse. Let Yorkshire show you the way.
Okay, now, I'm aware that there are still 3 more stories between the 13th Doctor and Yaz, okay? but considering that the audience have sat through nearly 6 hours of TV, and the Doctor and Yaz have only spent a couple of scenes together in that entire time, is it too much to ask that there's some sort of closure here, or a scene where these two can hash it out, or for Yaz to actually have a response to this? It wouldn't be as bad if it wasn't immediately followed by the Doctor hiding the fob watch with her memories inside of the TARDIS. While this scene is one of Jodie Whittaker's best performances as the Doctor, it just seems like a whole lot of nothing and a whole lot of teasing, despite this being a series finale, and I understand teasing into the future, but when we don't even get basic closure as to whether or not the universe itself is still around, what did we get closure for in this story? While there's absolutely something to be said for the start of the Doctor's journey being her hunting her past, and now her actually being in possession of the watch at the end, where she can access those memories, what about the past 6 episodes has made her not want to open it in the end? I'm sure there's the interpretation or some subtext here, but come on, you're actually allowed to put something in the text itself to give the audience an inkling that there is something going on at the heart of these characters. The audience shouldn't have to headcanon everything going on in your story. Or you could just dedicate that screen time to Sontarans craving chocolate.
Chocolate!
Maybe if the Doctor had spent more time with Yaz over these 6 episodes, this ending would feel more justified, like maybe she realises what the hunt for her past was doing to her and her friends, but that's not really what happened here. It's also really concerning that when describing the plot of The Vanquishers, you can do it really comprehensively, but not mention Yaz or Dan at all. Is it great to have John Bishop on board? Yes. Is Mandip Gill an incredible talent? I'd argue that she is, but you could genuinely excise Dan and Yaz from Doctor Who Flux, and practically speaking, not lose anything. But I think I'll have to save this discussion for a proper look back on Doctor Who Flux as a whole, which leads me to my conclusion for The Vanquishers. After I've talked about the production, because my god is this a brilliant looking and sounding episode. Segun Akinola's music is incredible. I love his 13th Doctor theme at the end. I love the music as the Flux are destroying the fleets, which has incredible CGI as well. I think that director as Her Salim and DOP Phil Wood's shot compositions are incredible as well, and the transitions from subplot to subplot are pretty sublime. As Her Salim directed a short film a few years ago called Project Artichoke, which follows a guy who sometimes literally falls and stumbles into flashbacks and scenes to move the story forward, and I think that abstraction and fluidity and going from place to place made him a perfect director to put together Once Upon Time, Survivors of the Flux and The Vanquishers. Brilliant stuff, I can't wait to see what he does next. Anyway, overall for The Vanquishers, it simultaneously feels like a finale that is wholly unsatisfying, but still has some strong emotional beats, that was able to tie up most of its loose ends practically, yet still leaves some pretty basic questions up in the air. An episode that's able to coast along on the unquestionable talent of its production values and its actors, but the script either gives these characters nothing to latch onto, or in some cases gives their characters' arcs to someone else. But you know what? I did have a good time with it. My initial gut reaction when watching it was that this was Chris Chibnall's best finale, and I stand by that on repeat viewings. Most of the issues that I've mentioned in this episode in this review mainly came to light on repeat viewings, and I do think there is value to something this complex holding together for the most part on the initial watch. It feels like there is some decent character stuff to gravitate towards, unlike the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos, and it also didn't bore me, like The Timeless Child, due to how uninvolved the Doctor was in that story. If anything, the Doctor might be too involved in this finale, as splitting her up into 3 means her companions are left just taking up space. But The Vanquishers moves along really quickly. I think it's the funniest story that Chris Chibnall has written. There's some great imagery here, and it does feel like a conclusion in style, if not in story. I also think it's a pretty good case study to justify the serialized format. Seeing these characters reunited, seeing their skill sets get applied, and work towards a common goal at the end does feel satisfying, even if, in hindsight, you really start to question why some episodes were structured the way they were. and that maybe some of these subplots could have been cut out entirely, and maybe a writer who is more interested in these characters and their journeys and less on the frenetic moving around and the back and forth of a story like this might have been better equipped to tell a nearly 6-hour story and make it come together at the end, because I think logistically, in terms of the actual story, it does technically come together at the end, except for the whole, you know, is the universe still around, which is a pretty big question to ask. And, to Chris Chibnall's credit, I don't think I could have written The Vanquishers. In its own way, the episode, this finale, is a pretty insane accomplishment. There was 1 million moving parts in Doctor Who Flux, and around 900,000 of them do come together in the end here, and that's impressive in its own right. But on the other hand, did Chris Chibnall actually need to write 1 million moving parts in the first place? I think fans, when they defend all of the plates that Chibnall was spinning, forget that Doctor Who Flux's 1 million threads didn't just exist one morning. Those plates didn't just arrive on Chibnall's hands. He had to write them and conjure them up in the first place. It was a self-defeating way of writing a serialized story, and maybe, just for once, the Flux did not have to be the friends we made along the way. It probably should, and could, have been something a bit more than that. Instead, we got chocolate.
Chocolate!
But anyway, I'll do a proper dive into the whole of the Doctor Who Flux saga at some point, but next time we join the Dr. Yaz and Dan for the new year at Elf Storage Facility, where they're caught in a time loop against the Daleks, armed with new weaponry, in Eve of the Daleks. I'll see you next time. Hey folks, so that's the end of Doctor Who Flux. And yeah, so lots to talk about, lots to think about really. I think what I'm going to do for my next video is that I'm going to step away from Flux for a little bit, maybe do that review of Evil of the Daleks, or finally watch Class for my patrons, one of my patron tiers. So once I've done that, then I'll return to Doctor Who Flux as a full, like, 6-episode thing, and then see if it worked as serialized storytelling. But if you want to get notified on any of those future projects, the best thing you can do is to hit that subscribe button, and also while you're at it, hit that like button as well, because it really helps me out. Also, don't forget to leave any comment down below. It appeases the YouTube algorithm. It's massively appreciated. And if you enjoyed this review so much that you actually reached the credits, then you sound like someone who would like to become a patron of mine to help support my channel, to help to keep the lights on, like these wonderful people, like all of these names you're seeing on screen right now. And I'd like to give a shout out to these particular patrons: Anne Neubauer, Andrew, Dean Jones, Andrew Blewett, Callum Baird, Daniel Davis, Dylan Whitaker, Flabu, Flipmeister MK, Leela, Matthew Perry, Michael Serrano, Nate Harris, Palex, Raven Woods, The Brit Sniper, Toby Loxton, Zachary Taylor aka Mario Fanboy 15, Dan Morrison, Nathaniel Holden, Samuel Brooks, Zarby555, Aaron Carver, Adam Grattan, Darius, Finley Rude, George is Lost, Ginger Animator, Harvey Smith, Jack D. Evans, Joseph Adams, Joshua McDonough, Ollie Tomlinson, Rebecca Hill, Ricky Temple, Ryan Duncan, Samuel Whitaker, The Raggedy Jedi, Will Be Fat, and Zach Conway. Thanks so much to all of my patrons who get access to these reviews extra early, who can get access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server if they pledge a certain amount. I also hope you folks are enjoying my current December marathon, my top 50 Doctor Who scenes of the revived series. Now that Flux is over, I can actually work on my Christmas Eve video, so even though it's nearly the end of the year, there's still a lot to do. I'll see you folks next time.